Here we go. All right. Hi, everybody. How are you? I'm going to be presenting a short review of Colonel John Glover. He actually did become a brigadier general eventually. When he was offered the commission, I will just tell you, by George Washington, he initially turned it down. He did not think he was worthy of it. But he reluctantly later on, prior to the Battle of Saratoga, accepted it. But John Glover, and I think maybe you probably know the name from the Battle of Trenton, when he and his Marbleheaders ferried Washington's army across the Delaware. A little bit about General John Glover, or we say at this time, Colonel John Glover. He was born in Marblehead, Massachusetts. He lost his father at the age of 4, and he was raised by other family members. He became a dealer in rum, working his way up. He became a merchant, and then an owner of various ships within the area, and a shipper. When the war came, many of the men that would become part of his regiment, he knew prior to the war. And remember what I just said. He was a shipper, and he owned ships and schooners in the area. These Marbleheaders were mariners, and they were seamen. He knew them. They worked together. He worked with them. They worked for him. Marblehead, Massachusetts, is a very close community. It's a seafaring community. And John Glover, prior to this, didn't have military experience as well. So it was actually natural that he would be elected lieutenant colonel of the 21st Massachusetts Militia, which eventually became a Continental Regiment known as the 14th Continental Regiment. And Colonel John Glover was lieutenant colonel. He then took over the colonelcy in late 1775, early 1776. And his men were known for being stout individuals. Washington relied on them prior to the battles of Trenton. In August of 1776, as you may know, Washington's forces were trapped at New York on Long Island. Battle of Brooklyn, Battle of Long Island. John Glover's men acted in a capacity of moving Washington's army at night through a dense fog across Long Island and across King's Bridge into Manhattan, away from the British forces. There were almost 20,000 British forces coming and converging in that area. Washington asked Glover, "Can you move my army?" He said yes. At that point, his regiment numbered about 750 men. And I will get into this a little bit later, but initially the regiment, like I said, was 750 men. These men, again, had prior military service, they had prior seafaring service, so it was natural that these men would be called in to help and move the army. Like I said, once the army was moved from Long Island over to Manhattan, out of harm's way for that point, the British then converged another 4,500 men at Pell's Point in New York to further trap the Continental Army. The Continental Army then had to move back across King's Bridge, which meant that Glover's men had to then act again and move the army back. But what Glover was also asked to do was to save the army within the space of a week a second time. Washington needed time to move his army now across into New Jersey. Glover's men, 750 men, made a last stand. They blocked Pell's Point from 4,500 British soldiers attacking. They held the line. They held it for 5 to 6 hours till Washington could move his men. So again, John Glover and his Marbleheaders saved Washington's army for the second time. The second time. Again, as we move into 1776, late 1776, Washington is moved out of New York. He's coming across New Jersey. He's losing men. People are deserted. New Jersey is in turmoil because there are proclamations being put out saying that if you leave and lay down your arms, if you sign that you a loyalty oath to the king, we will forget your treason. Many people in New Jersey are taking him up on this, and the individuals in the army are taking him up on this. Out of an army of almost 20,000 men, okay, prior to the Battle of Brooklyn, Washington is down to about 8,000 men. All right? But Washington has a plan. He moves over through New Jersey, he moves into Pennsylvania. Okay? Philadelphia is evacuated at this point. Continental Congress does not know what to do. They say, we are leaving it in your hands, General Washington. On your decision. We will base everything on your decision, your military decision. And everybody thinks that Washington just came up with this idea to attack Trenton out of the blue. No, he didn't. There was intelligence coming in, and we discussed this prior, from many entities in the area. Intelligence was constantly coming in. Washington had been discussing with his men as early as November attacking British forces. He knew the enlistments of his men were going to be up at the end of December. He had to do something. So what he did is he put together a three-pronged attack. Most people think it was just Washington attacking at Trenton. There were three wings. There was General Cadwalader, who was going to attack and come down. General Heath was going to come up and cross the Delaware, come into Trenton on the lower edge, and Washington was going to cross with the main body. Unfortunately, anybody that knows the Delaware, and I work in Trenton, and I can tell you, during this hard winter that we had, this cold winter, you cannot believe how the Delaware River cakes up. There were many times when I'm driving home at work and I saw those cakes of ice. It reminded me, and I can just imagine how it was for Washington and his men and for Glover's men to move the army across. I mean, there were literally cakes of ice. 2 days later, you wouldn't see it. Within 2 days, you'd see cakes of ice. The Delaware is funny that way. Again, three-pronged attack. This is put together. It's well thought out. It's well planned. Like I said, most people think that this was just haphazard. It wasn't. Washington comes to Glover. He says, Glover, I need you to move my army. We are going to attack. I need your men to do it. What happens is, and I'm going to ask this, how many of you have ever seen the movie The Crossing? Okay? And you see that it's almost like, okay, Glover goes out, he confiscates these boats from the ironworks, and that's it. No, these boats were being brought in weeks ahead of time. Like I told you, this is a well-planned attack. So now Glover and his fishermen, they are detailed to bring the army over. Okay? I brought this in, and this is a Mort Kunstler, a copy of a Mort Kunstler. How many of you have seen the Lutza painting? Washington is in the Durham boat. He's up like this with the flag. Number one, that flag would not have been there. That was not till 1777. Would have been the Grand Union flag, or it would have been his headquarters flag. This is what the crossing probably would have looked like. Underneath here is your Durham boats. There's an artillery piece, if you can see right here. This is Washington. Here are the men in the boat, crowded. Actually, planks had to be put over the Durham boats. Spikes had to be driven in to bring the artillery over. Okay? to bring the men over. These men, Glover's Marbleheaders, all through the night for hours went back and forth and crisscrossed, bringing artillery, bringing men and supplies over to the New Jersey side. And what they brought about 2,900 men. And remember I told you it was a three-pronged attack? Cadwalader tried to cross north of the city. Cadwalader couldn't cross. And anybody that knows Trenton, there's a Cadwalader Park. General Cadwalader got part of his militia and part of his troops over. He couldn't get his artillery over. The cakes of ice precluded this. He had to bring his men back. Heath could not cross. Where he was, it was untenable. So it left it to Washington, Washington's main body. And who were in the lead force? It was the Marbleheaders. That is one thing in the crossing that is true. The Marbleheaders were there, and they were on point, leading the army. These men, all night, bringing the army back and forth, and they come and they fight a battle. This tells you a little bit about these individuals. And here's a makeup of the regiment. They were known as the 21st Massachusetts, but then the 14th Continental, because regiments were now being known as Continental Regiments. It was composed at this point, after Long Island, of about 500 men. Okay? They were mariners, and Washington called these individuals that they were bred for the sea. He relied on these men, and he relied in Glover. And again, the friction that you see in the crossing between Glover and Washington, that's for Hollywood, folks. Because Glover was one of his trusted men. Okay? The regiment became known as an amphibious regiment. And again, because Washington could rely on them. Most of the men were seamen, like I said, fishermen or mariners. And mariners, we mean individuals that were on sloops, ships. Okay? Here's one interesting fact. The integration of the unit. This was the first fully integrated regiment or military unit in the United States Armed Forces, because it was a continental unit. What is this year, June 14th? This year, it's the birthday of the U.S. Army, the Continental Army. Okay? This regiment was made up of individuals that Glover worked with prior to the war and during the war. Men of color, black men, Native Americans, Jewish, Spanish, and their white counterparts. This was a fully integrated regiment. All these men worked together prior to the war. There was no animosity. They knew each other. They knew they had to work together. And there was no friction. Again, it was the first fully integrated regiment. They worked for a cause prior to the war and during the war. But the thing is, they could be relied on. All right? Number two, the muster rolls. And I want all of you, if you have the time when you leave tonight and over the next few weeks, if you go on a site which is Marblehead Museum, you will find that they have put together companies and muster rolls taken from Massachusetts men and sailors during the Revolution of about 700 men, identified men of Glover's regiment. And some of the descriptions are short, but most of them are pretty well detailed. And you'll see descriptions of height, age, color, and you'll see about 38% that we estimate of this regiment was made up of men of color, Native Americans, Spanish, Jewish men. And again, there was no ethnic, there was no racial, there was no religious blocks here with this regiment. These were all men fighting for a cause, working together, like I said, prior to the war, during the war, and after the war. Now, when the regiment brings Washington's army across the Delaware, we know that he hits the British, captures 900 Hessians, and much needed supplies. What do these men do now? They bring his army and the prisoners back across into Pennsylvania. Washington has another idea. He said, I'm going back into Trenton, and I'm going to hit him again. Glover's men, he asked Glover, Glover's men bring him right back across into Trenton. Most people don't even know about the Second Battle of Trenton. It's called Assunpink Creek. Brings them back in. Washington is there. The British come in. They try and move Washington. Washington now has the New Jersey militia. Cadwalader is there. Heath is there. Philemon Dickinson, I don't know if you know that name, commander of the New Jersey militia. The New Jersey militia is there, the Continentals. They hold the line and they drive the British back. What does Washington do? He hits them. They fight. They hold him. Washington says, I'm going to go up the road, because he gets intelligence that British forces are marching down, but there's a small contingent at Princeton. He said, I'm going to go now up the road. I'm going to come around their flank, and I'm going to hit him at Princeton. What does he and Glover do? He and his men get together with some other small units, and I will say the New Jersey militia, because the New Jersey militia are the ones that set the campfires. And when Washington moves out, as he's called by the British, that old fox, he moves his army out with campfires burning. The British think that they're still there encamped. He comes up and he strikes him at Princeton. And who's there again? The Marbleheaders are there with the army. And the New Jersey militia slowly filter out and rejoin the army. After this, Glover gets word that his wife is ill. A few weeks later, he and his regiment now with enlistments up, Washington implores them, can you please stay? Most of these men say no. They're going home. They're going home. And unfortunately, that did happen a lot during the war. But what these men did, everybody, this is known as the 10 Crucial Days. Campaign of Trenton and Princeton. 10 crucial days. Because let's face it, if it wasn't for these men being here to move the army, to carry out that plan, we may not even be here. The war may have been over at that point. Really, it may have been over at that point. So that's why this campaign and these men who served the army so well during their short stead from 1775 to 1776, and I will tell you, after the regiment went back to Marblehead, most of these men became privateers on their own with the Massachusetts forces, or they joined the militia or the Continentals. Okay, but they continued to fight. Right? But their short service as a regiment, the 21st Massachusetts and the 14th Continental Regiment, is an illustrious part of our history, our military history, and we should be thankful to them, and they should be revered for what they did. And I'll take some questions.
In reading some New England publications, they found out before that 20,000 army showed up in Staten Island that the British plan was to start up north and literally wipe out every town.
Correct.
Modeling the Irish situation, the Scottish situation.
You're absolutely right. It was to lay waste. That's what they were going to do. That's what they were going to do. And they did also feel that New Jersey, and I shared this with you a few presentations before. Everyone thinks that the Patriots, everybody ran and said, okay, this is what happened at Lexington and Concord, we're going to rally. New Jersey's legislature said no. There was a huge discussion. New Jersey's legislature said, wait a minute, do we really, really want to do this? Do we really want to engage in this? And anyone, I would implore you, go into the archives, the state archives, look in the files, and you will find the discourse between the government at this time, because New Jersey was not ready to rally to the cause right off the bat. They were not. They were not. So everyone thinks that, yeah, no. We had to be prodded.
Yeah, I think Norm Goss told us that in New Jersey, it was 30% for loyalists, 30% for patriots, and the other 30% didn't care.
You're absolutely right.
Something like that. And that's the issue we had.
No, you're absolutely right. And those percentages are pretty much accurate. Now here's the thing. If you're a Whig or a patriot here in New Jersey, it's more of a 60% to 70% loyalist, because look at the way a patriot would look at it. Okay, I'm fighting. I have my neighbor who doesn't care what's happening, who's trading with the enemy, and they would eventually become London traders. That's what we called them, because they traded with the enemy. Now you have your hardcore Tories, under William Franklin and Cortlandt Skinner and the New Jersey Volunteers, who were raiding back and forth from Staten Island, their own people here in New Jersey. So those percentages are pretty much accurate. Yes. And a lot of your counties, Bergen County was a loyalist county. I hate to say it, but down south, a lot of loyalism down here. Quite a bit of loyalism down here. Middlesex County, where my folks are from, and Somerset, we were patriots there.
You mentioned 20,000 British regulars.
Yes. Combined forces.
I guess what I'm saying is to put that into perspective, what was the population of New York at the time?
I really do not know, but it was probably the most densely populated colony, with that in Massachusetts.
I'm thinking that the Manhattan itself probably had less than 20,000 people living there.
Oh, absolutely.
So
the army was greater than the population of the area.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But look at it this way. You've got 20,000 combined forces, trained individuals. Now you've got Hessians, you've got trained regulars, and you have different type of regulars.
Yeah.
You have light infantry, heavy grenadiers. I mean, my gosh.
Well, didn't they say there's like 400 ships came into?
Absolutely.
I mean, it's just amazing.
On the North River alone, and I want to expand on this too, and then I'll close it down because we'll just give it another 5 minutes. There was actually another individual involved and another group involved with moving that army from Long Island over to Manhattan. There was a group of boatmen from the Westchester County Militia that also gathered boats and helped move the army over. And they are unsung heroes as well. And we found out that through some of the actual records between correspondence between George Washington and some of the officers in those areas.
How these guys get paid?
Most times they weren't paid. And the one individual whose company was involved from Westchester, he was a landowner in the area. He paid for raising his own company, and the other colonel raised his own regiment. They paid for it out of their own pocket. And they almost went bankrupt at the end of the war. Yeah.
Wow.
But they paid for it themselves.
Okay, one more question. These Durham boats were not small, and they were really, really sturdy boats. Where did they all come from?
I can tell you they were from different areas, mills, ore mines. Look at what we had in these areas. Anybody, and it wasn't just, most of them were Durham boats, but I was told that there were some other smaller boats involved in this as well. So most of the Durham boats, from what I understand, were from the ore manufacturing in the area. But again, these boats were being brought in weeks ahead of time, because this plan was not just, okay, I'm going to get my officers together, have an officers' council, and we're going to do this. This was planned because, and I will implore you, anybody, please go on the National Archives site the George Washington papers, and take a look. And you'll see this correspondence back and forth in November about this planning here. It's very, very interesting. Very interesting. But folks, thank you very much. And